Earth isn't our home. Earth is just a place that we come here, that we come to learn and to experience. But the other side, or heaven, or the afterlife, whatever you want to call it, that's our real home. That's where God created our home to be. And we just come into lifetimes periodically to learn and to experience. So these orientation counselors help people remember where they're from. And the reason that they're there is very few of us ever remember where we came from when we come into a lifetime. We always everybody always wants to believe that there's life after death, but we don't remember. So when we finish a lifetime, we go down the tunnel and we go into the white light. That's what the orientation counselors are there for, to help us remember.
I'm very pleased to have John Davis with me today. John, welcome to my channel. I'm really excited to have this conversation with you.
Hey Tia, thanks so much for having me on. I love to share my story, and so thank you for having me on your show. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, absolutely. And you had amazing experience, one of the most detailed experience, if not the most detailed experience ever recorded, where in 1987 you were just 21 years old, went in for surgery and had an allergic reaction. You died and
Yep,
went to heaven. Take me back,
exactly.
take me back and tell me what happened.
Sure, absolutely. Well, here's how the whole thing started. My dad was in sales for his career, and one year he won a sales event, and part of what he won were these two mopeds, or what we call scooters now. And we used to ride these things all over the neighborhood. One day I was out riding and I had an accident, and I slammed into a tree. And how I landed, I tore the tendons off my right hand and needed to go in to have surgery to have them reattached. Well, I had never really been in a hospital. I never had surgery before, so I didn't know what to expect. So my mom drives me down to the hospital, and when I go into the operating room and they start to give me the IV of the anesthetic, I had some kind of a horrific reaction, and it stopped my heart, and I died. And here's how my whole story started. And one thing I want to tell your audience is, I'm sure your audience has probably heard of a traditional near death experience where the person has some kind of a situation, there's an accident, or they die in surgery, and they find themselves floating above their body. They can look down, they can see the scene, then they become aware of a tunnel. And at the end of the tunnel, there's a white light. And as they start going down this tunnel, they're met by somebody. Almost always, it's someone that passed before them, someone who would, like a parent or a grandparent or a friend, who tells them it's not their time. They have to go back. So we've never known what is on the other side of that white light. Well, what they did with me, and I still don't understand how they did it, but my whole story starts on the other side of the white light. And that's where my story begins. I think of all of our stories, all of these NDE stories, as each piece is a piece of a jigsaw puzzle. And I think of mine that way too. I think of my piece is that we know now what happens when people go into the light. So I'm back in the operating room. The anesthesia goes through, stops my heart. The very next thing I remember, I was standing in the most beautiful building I had ever seen. It was made of white marble. It looked like polished white marble, absolutely pristine and perfect and far beyond beautiful to anything I can ever describe. It was so much more. And it was long, this long, long building. It was so long, I couldn't even see the end of it. It looked like it had gone on for miles. On my right hand side, all the way down, were these tall, gigantic marble white columns, maybe 20 or 30 feet high. And they went all the way down, maybe 6 feet apart. In the center of this building were these tables, marble white tables, and each table had four benches around each side of it. And it went down as far as you could see. And there were two people sitting at every one of these tables. Well, right about now, as I was standing in this beautiful building, in my left ear, I heard, "My name is Alan. I'm your spirit guide." And what happened from here is this being named Alan took me on this adventure of a part of the other side. And I still don't know what area it was in because it was just one small area, but it felt like it was like being on a college campus. When you know how you have your history building over here, you've got your English building, you've got your science building. That's kind of what it felt like where I was. He took me to all these places and he took me to the outside of what these buildings looked like. And then he took me to the inside. So he talked to me in my left ear. And as this whole thing unfolded, everything he was showing me, he was telling me in my left ear. So he told me that the building that I was in right now was called the Orientation Center. And off to my left were these, the only way that I can describe these is there were tunnels that looked like they were cut out of solid marble. Perfect doorways, just like the doorway into your house, perfect 90-degree angle. And they were all the way down, these tunnels, maybe 6 feet apart. They kind of coincided with the columns on the right hand side. So you had the columns, then these tables, then these tunnels. And as I looked inside these tunnels, it was like looking into space. It was absolutely black. And he told me that the people that were sitting at these tables, they're called orientation counselors. And their whole job is to help people remember where they're from when they finish a lifetime here on Earth. So he told me, he said, look up at the next tunnel. So I looked up at the next tunnel, and there was a man coming through. He was an elderly gentleman, maybe in his 80s or 90s. He had lived a long lifetime, and he had his right hand over his chest, like he was having chest pain. And my guide said he just passed from a heart attack. So the woman that was sitting closest to him, one of these orientation counselors, she stood up and she walked over to where he was standing, right by the tunnel. She took his hands in hers and she walked him back down to the table and they sat down. Well, what this is when you're inside the tunnel and you finish your lifetime and you're coming down the tunnel towards the white light, when you go into the white light, you end up in the orientation center. And that's how everybody gets back home. Because Earth, and I'm sure a lot of your audience has heard this before, that Earth isn't our home. Earth is just a place that we come here, that we come to learn and to experience. But the other side, or heaven, or the afterlife, whatever you want to call it, that's our real home. That's where God created our home to be. And we just come into lifetimes periodically to learn and to experience. So these orientation counselors help people remember where they're from. And the reason that they're there is very few of us ever remember where we came from when we come into a lifetime. We always everybody always wants to believe that there's life after death, but we don't remember. So when we finish a lifetime, we go down the tunnel and we go into the white light. That's what the orientation counselors are there for, to help us remember. Well, she was sitting across from him and his back was to me and I could see her talking to him, but I was too far away to hear what she was saying. But my guide was telling me that they remind people where they're from, that they finished an earth life, they're back home again, this is where they came from, this is real home now. And he told me to watch this gentleman. So as she was talking to him, I was watching him, and Tia, all of a sudden, he began to change. And he changed from an elderly gentleman who had lived a long lifetime here on earth. And he changed back into how all of us appear as we were created on the other side. We're all in our 30s. And, and the one thing I wish I would have known is I didn't know to ask my guide any questions. Because during this whole process, I never knew that I died. I was just going along with all of this as it was happening. It never occurred to me that I died because I think I would have asked so many questions. And one of those questions would have been, why are we all in our 30s? Is it because Jesus died at 33, or I have no idea what the reason for that is, but we're all young. And that's how we appear on the other side. Well, when she was done talking to him, after giving him the orientation, he stood up and he walked off to the right and he walked down 3 steps between these columns and he walked into what I call as the gardens because they were the most beautiful gardens I have ever seen. I've never seen anything like it here on earth. It had the greenest grass and the most beautiful, colorful flowers you can possibly imagine. There were trees and plants, and it's just a perfectly manicured garden. The best thing I can think of is an English garden where it's beautifully taken care of. That's what this looked like. And what it was is every time we come back from a lifetime, we go into the orientation center and then we go between these columns into the garden area and we have what is called a reunion. Everybody that this gentleman knew in his lifetime was there. Everybody who'd passed before him, his parents, his grandparents, friends, siblings, everybody that he knew in his lifetime, plus all the people that he already knew on the other side were there waiting. And here's something that I was just amazed to find out. The reason that we have the reunion is it's a really big deal when people come to Earth because this planet is considered the hardest of all of them. So when you come to a lifetime here, just the fact that you came here, that you made the decision to come into a lifetime here, already makes you a winner. You've already won the race just by coming here. So everyone was there to greet him. And everybody was applauding and laughing and hugging this gentleman and telling him what a great job he had done. And that's something that all of us will have. And I think so many of us don't even realize how much of a warrior you have to be when you come here. And we don't realize how many people are really rooting for us on the other side because it is a big deal. You look at the just all the things that every one of us has been through in our lives. We all go through our own Mount Everest. We all have these tough times, and we don't think anything about it. We don't realize that it's such a big deal just to come here. It's a huge accomplishment. And so all of us will have a reunion when we get back. And here's something else that I absolutely loved is all of the animals that you've ever had in your lifetime that you loved, they're all there also. The animals that we have make the transition just like we do. So they're there. And you never have to lose them again. And I know this because my guide showed me 2 cats that I had when I was growing up. We had got these little kittens when they were weeks old, and we had them for probably 20, 18, 20 years. And I spent most of my childhood with them. So I was just elated to see them on the other side, that they actually do transition just like we do. So God gave them souls that they're with us forever when we get back to the other side. So that was the reunion. And then what happens next, I don't know if this is what happens with all of us in terms of the steps that we take when we get back from a lifetime, but this is just what my guide showed me. So first it was the orientation, then it was the reunion, and then he took me to, oh, I wanted to forget for your audience. A couple of years ago, I was doing some just Google searching, and I came across this building in the country of Turkey, and it's called the Temple of Artemis, Artemis, Artemis. And the reason I mention it is because it looks almost identical to the what the orientation building that I was in looked like. The orientation center is gigantic, huge building, but this building in Turkey looks really similar to what I saw. So they might want to go look it up, do a Google search, and see what it looks like. So he took me to the outside of this next building, and it was this huge rectangular building. And these buildings were so large, I can't even just. There's nothing like them here on Earth. The only equivalent in size is maybe what the Egyptian pyramids look like. but absolutely huge, huge buildings. And it had columns all along the outside, white marble columns, this beautiful rectangular building. And he takes me inside, and the room that he takes me to is round, and it looks just like a theater, but it's a round theater. And hanging from the ceiling are all these movie screens, all in a circle. There must have been maybe 15 or 20 of these movie screens. And my guide said, "This is the life review. And everybody who finishes their lifetime undergoes a life review. And all of us will go through it." And all of a sudden, after he said, "This is a life review," all of a sudden, all the screens lit up. And it was like watching a movie of my life up to that age where I was at age 21. And one screen was showing me as a little toddler, another screen showed me entering my first day of kindergarten, and each one of these screens was playing an episode of my lifetime. And the reason that we do this, there's kind of two reasons really. Number one is you learn. You come in to have these lessons that you choose to learn from. And the idea is, did you learn everything you came to learn when you came into this lifetime? And so it shows you all these different episodes of your life playing. And the second reason we have these life reviews is to see how our lives affected other people. One of the craziest things that I remember about this is there was a little kid in my class. His name was Troy, and he had some kind of disability with his legs. He had to walk with crutches. Well, one day he fell in the playground, and a couple of us ran over and helped pick him up. I never thought anything about that. I never thought it was any big deal. It was just something you did to help somebody. But on the other side, they were showing that as a huge accomplishment during one of these video screens. It's something that really helped this other child. Well, at the same time, you also learn if you did anything that hurt anybody. Because one of the reasons that we have the life review, the primary reason, is to learn. And you learn about how your actions affected others. And most people don't hurt other people. That's just something that I think there's a goodness, this light that's in all of us, that we don't hurt people. But there are some that choose a different path, and some do choose that. Like Hitler, for example. Everybody has to have a life review. And what happens is if somebody intentionally hurts somebody else that caused somebody harm, that soul during the life review will feel what their victims felt. And it is the greatest learning process for all of us because God gives all of us as many times as we need to learn and to grow. So, the life review, you also see the negative things that happened as well as the good things that happened. And that was what we call the life review. Well, the next place he took me to, again, was another gigantic, huge building with marble columns all around the outside. And he took me to the inside, and inside was a little bit different. This room he took me to looked like what we would describe as a regular movie theater, a long building with a movie screen up front. And this was something that I had a really hard time with because I don't know if I told you, but I was raised Catholic. And my dad was a staunch Catholic. We used to go to church 2 or 3 times a week and then also on Sundays. So I grew up with Catholicism. And the building that he was in, he told me he is going to show me past lifetimes. And the reason is that he wanted me, my guide, wanted me to be able to tell people that this is not the only lifetime that you live, because we have been in existence for billions of years at the creation when all of us were created by God. And of course, we have had more than one lifetime. But I had a hard time with that because I was never raised that way. And he showed me 3 separate lifetimes. The first one he showed me, the screen came on, and it was a monk. I was a monk, and I had a shaved head. I was wearing a red gown, and I was in a monastery, and my job was to teach kids about the monastery, about being a monk. I was a teacher in that life. And then that one disappeared. The next one came on this video screen or this movie screen, and it was me. I was a shoe peddler. I had a little wooden wheelbarrow, and I had shoes piled in this wheelbarrow. And my job in that life was I fixed people's shoes. So I took them back to my shop, I fixed them, put them back in the wheelbarrow, and took them out to where everybody lived. And that was my job. And that lifetime took place somewhere in Eastern Europe. In the first life, where I was the monk, that took place somewhere in Asia. And then that one disappeared. Then the third one appeared, and I was a fisherman, and I was standing in a little wooden boat on a lake, and I had nets, and I was tossing these nets in the water. And part of my job in that life was to help feed the village with fish. And I had such a hard time believing that this was real, that I actually saw something, that after my NDE, a couple months later, I went to see a hypnotherapist because I had heard that they can help you see different lifetimes, and I wanted to see if what I saw was real. Well, sure enough, when I went in for the appointment, I saw three different lifetimes. So I knew that past lifetimes were real. And what's so extraordinary about that is it's totally up to the individual if they want to come into a lifetime or not, because they don't have to. The idea to come into a lifetime to learn is completely on us. It's totally up to us. If we want to learn something, we can come into a lifetime to do that. But you don't have to. There are many souls who don't want to come to Earth because it is so hard. And I'll get to that in just a couple of minutes about some of the other things that I learned about other planets. But that was the past life building. So I learned that past lifetimes really are real, that we can have as many or as few as we want. And we can still learn on the other side. But it's like trying to describe to somebody what it's like to ride a bike for the first time. You can explain it to them, but they really don't know what it's like until they do it. And that's kind of one of the reasons why we come into a lifetime, is to experience the things that we can't learn on the other side. And what a lot of people ask me is, well, why do we come into a lifetime in the first place? What's the reason? Well, the number one reason that I learned is that on the other side, it's a perfect world. There is no war, there's no disease, there's no hunger, there's no homelessness, there's just nothing negative. And when you come into a life on earth, you learn by going through different challenges. And I know that's kind of hard to accept, but when you look at your life and you look at the painful things you went through, those are the episodes of your life that taught you the most. And it's almost like the hardest things you go through, that's what makes you who you are. And on the other side, we can still learn. We just don't have anything to work through. Does that make sense? Okay, good, good. So that was the past life. The next building he took me to was probably the most beautiful building that I had seen. It was a perfectly round building, absolutely gigantic. And it had those white marble columns all around in a circle. And it had a big dome on it. And the only building that I've ever seen that reminds me of it is a building in Rome. It's called the Pantheon. And if you've ever seen it, it's a big building with a big dome on it. That's what this looked like, but it was beautiful white marble. And my guide was taking me to all these different places, telling me what I was seeing. And he said that this building, every building that he took me to had a specific reason for it, that we go there for certain reasons. And this one he took me to is where we plan our lifetimes. So he took me to the inside and he walked me up to a table, a beautiful white marble table. And on the table was a scroll. And it looked like an Egyptian papyrus. It looked kind of like that brown kind of color, and it was rolled up in a scroll with a blue ribbon around it. And I picked it up and I took the ribbon off and I unfolded the scroll on the table. and I could immediately see that it was black writing. And it looked like the kind of writing that when you're a kid, they have you do calligraphy. Remember when you have an ink pen and you dip it in the ink well and then you write out with ink? That's kind of what it looked like. And my guide explained to me that all of our lifetimes are planned ahead of time, that none of us have random lives, that we actually come here for specific reasons. And we plan things out like what country we're going to live in, what language are we going to learn, who are our parents going to be, what kind of jobs are we going to have, are we going to go to school, are we going to have kids? All of these things go into what we plan for a lifetime. And what it was kind of similar to is what a lot of us do at the end of every year when you have New Year's resolutions and you plan out these goals for yourself for next year. That's kind of what it was like. But when I went to try to read what I had written, all of a sudden the scroll folded up and I wasn't able to read what I wrote. And I think the reason was because I wasn't allowed to see the things that I had planned for my life. Because if I knew what I was going to be, what was going to happen, I may have done something to avoid what I had chosen. So right about that point, I looked off to my right, and there was this huge, long wall, and it had to have been blocks or miles long, and it was full of scrolls. Every single person that was in life on the earth at that time had a scroll on this wall. And that's where my guide took me. He took down my scroll when I got to this building so he could show me that all of our lives are actually planned ahead of time. Well, right about then, I looked off to my left, and on the left hand side was this huge, gigantic window, and there was a walkway outside the building, and there were people walking back and forth. It was huge, huge. Wherever he took me on the other side, it was really busy. It was a really busy area. People were everywhere, and people have always asked me, "Well, what do we look like?" Everybody looks just like we do. Everybody has bodies. Everyone has their own look to them, just like all of us have our own look to us. It was like what it looked like was if you go to a city during lunchtime and you see everybody walking around, everyone's going somewhere, everyone's walking, that's what it looked like, just full of people everywhere. And on the other side of this walkway, there was a lake. And Tia, it was to this day, I have never seen anything as beautiful as this lake. It was round, beautiful round. It was, and it looked like glass, not a not a wave of anything, just pure glass. And you could see the bottom. And all around the circle were these weeping willow trees. You know how those weeping willow trees have their branches that come over and they hang in? They were all hanging in the water. Their leaves were all sitting on the top of the water. And my guide explained to me that everything that you love to do here on earth, you can do on the other side. All of nature is there, but it's just more beautiful than anything we have here. They have oceans and mountains, and you can hike, you can go to lakes, you can go to rivers. Everything you like to do here, you can do over there. And I just thought that was such a wonderful thing to know that all the things you love, you can do over there too. And then he took me to an area that was like a gigantic library, and every one of these books in this part of the building, they all looked the same, and they were all on book racks or bookshelves, and they looked like Encyclopedia Britannicas, and they all had lettering that went down the binding of the book instead of going horizontal. All the lettering went down, and he took me to to the book that was most relevant to me, and the name on the book was Nina, Nina. And what my guide was showing me was a book of my soulmate. My soulmate's name is Nina. Well, I didn't know what this meant, but my guide explained to me that at creation, God created all of us with a perfect mate. And all of our mates' books were in this room, this huge library. And what was in there, for like, for example, my soulmate's name is Nina. That book contained everything about her at creation, what gifts she was given, the different lifetimes she's lived. All those things are in all of our books. So all of us have soulmates. What I don't know though is if a soulmate comes into a lifetime with us. I think they can. I just don't know how often that they do. Because if you had your soulmate with you, you would have a perfect relationship. And one of the things that we learn the most about ourselves when we come here is having relationships. They just teach us a lot. And I just don't know if you had your perfect mate with you, if that would teach you anything. So for people that feel like they've never found their perfect mate and they feel like they've wasted their lives, they haven't, because your perfect mate is on the other side. And when you finish your lifetime and go back, you will have that person with you. So you don't have to feel like you failed at life, that you were alone, that you lived a lonely life. That person is there for all of us. And I just don't know if they come into a lifetime very often. That's what I don't know. So that was the building where we plan a lifetime. The next building he took me to, I think, was my favorite. And he took me to the outside. And this one didn't have any marble or any columns. It looked like a huge, gigantic sports stadium where you might play football or soccer or rugby, just a huge stadium. And then he takes me to the inside, and on the inside were thousands and thousands of chairs. And I remember that all the lights were on, and it was super bright inside this building. And what it was a planetarium. Do you remember being a kid and taking field trips to a planetarium? Did they ever have that for you?
Yes, I love that.
Yeah, I did too. That's what this was. He took me to a planetarium, and it had a the ceiling was round, a big round ceiling, and there was a gentleman behind me, and I never turned around to look at him. He just talked to me, and everybody on the other side. Remember we talked about those orientation counselors? Everybody on the other side seems to have something that they love to do, that they were created by God to have these different talents. And the people who orientation counselors, that's what they love to do on the other side. They love to orientate and help people back from an earth life. Well, the gentleman that was behind me, he ran this planetarium. That's kind of what his job was. And people don't have jobs like we have here on earth where you have to go to a job to earn living to pay your bills. None of that exists on the other side. But people tend to have jobs over there. And this gentleman ran the planetarium. He knew all about stars and galaxies and planets, and he loved to run this part of the other side. Well, he said, let's begin. And all of a sudden, all the lights went off. It was pitch black. So I sat down, and he said to me, when you look at the stars, this is what you see. And what he was referring to was everybody on Earth at that time, at their level of knowledge and development, this is what they see when they look up at the sky, at the stars. And all of a sudden, he started showing me all of our solar system. First, our sun, then Earth, then Jupiter and Saturn and Uranus and Neptune, all of our planets in our solar system. And then they disappeared. And then he said, when we look at the stars, this is what we see. And he was referring to everybody on the other side with their level of knowledge and development at that point. This is what they see. And all of a sudden, planet after planet after planet started showing up on the ceiling. First, it was dozens, then hundreds, then thousands and and millions of planets. And all of them were different colors. Some were blue like Earth, others were red, some were yellow, some were green. And he said to me, there is far more life in the universe than you can possibly imagine. And I think that there were two reasons why my guide Alan showed me this planetarium. The first one was to show me that life is not the only planet that has life on it. Earth is only one of multitudes of millions of planets that have life. And the second reason was to show me that life is not the only planet that we come into a lifetime on. There are multitudes, millions of other worlds that we can have lifetimes on. Earth is only one. And I was so excited by this because all my life I had been a science fiction fan. Do you remember the original Star Trek series with Captain Kirk?
Yes, I used to watch that when I was a little girl with my dad. He loved that
Yeah,
show.
so did I. I loved that show, and ever since I was a little kid, I always believed that there was so much more in the universe than what we're told. There's so much more life. It's such a extraordinarily vast universe. And one thing I want to tell your audience, something that will kind of put this in perspective, I was listening to an astronomer a couple of years ago trying to explain to the layperson how big our galaxy actually is, how big the Milky Way galaxy is. And she was saying that if we had a ship that could travel at the fastest speed that we know, which is the speed of light, 186,000 miles per second, if we had a ship, it would take that ship 99,000 years to get from one end of our galaxy to the other. And that's just our galaxy, just the Milky Way. And astronomers estimate that there are billions and billions of galaxies in the universe. So when you think about that, you can't even begin to wrap your mind around how many planets there really must be. And she was saying that just in the Milky Way alone, they estimate that there are 100 billion planets just in our galaxy. Isn't that extraordinary?
That's incredible. And I often wonder, I'm glad you brought this up because I always wondered if we would just come to Earth, we lived every life on Earth, or there was other planets that we or even dimensions or realms that we got to visit and live lives on. So this is really interesting.
Yeah, isn't it? No, I think that was my favorite part. So that was the planetarium. The next building he took me to, this was the largest of all the buildings he took me to. This was a huge, long, again, long building, and it had columns, but the columns were only up in the front of the building. And it looked like our Supreme Court building in Washington. It looked like that, but just so long you couldn't see the end of it. It would probably take days to walk from one end of this building to the end of it. It was so gigantic. And there were these steps, all these marble steps that you had to walk up to get to the entrance of the building. So we go inside, and I realize that it's this huge library. There are bookshelves 20 or 30 feet high, full of books, and there were people everywhere. Some people were visiting, some people were reading, some people were looking for books. It was this huge library. And my guide told me that anything you ever wanted to learn is in this library. So the place that he took me to on the other side had a lot to do with our learning. And on the other side, you don't always sit around just reading. I know sometimes people say, "Well, is that all we do?" I was like, "No, you can go to music festivals, you can go to take classes, you can take lectures, you can hike in the mountains, you do anything you love to do. That's why it's such a perfect paradise." But we don't always just learn. But learning is there because it's I think when God created all of us, he created all of us with this kind of like DNA to want to learn and to grow. And forever, for eternity, we have this option to learn and to continue to grow. And so this building was a huge library. And he took me over to the left hand side of the library. And there were these rooms. And these rooms looked like what we would call today as study rooms inside of a library. They're about the size of somebody's average living room. And he took me to this one room, and there was a woman who was sitting there. She had her back to me. She was sitting on a couch, and she had jet black hair that went down to her waist. And she was wearing kind of a purple, lavender kind of a gown. And she was watching what we would call today that looked like a modern flat screen TV mounted on the wall. And it was so interesting to me because back in 1987, we didn't have flat screen TVs yet. We had these big, bulky televisions that weighed hundreds of pounds that you couldn't mount on a wall, they were too heavy. But this one looked like a 50 or 60-inch video screen that she was watching. And she was watching what I thought was a movie. What else could it be? And she was watching, it looked like a battle that was taking place between Native American Indian tribes and the United States cavalry. It was a battle. And I thought it was a movie. And my guide said she is watching living history. She was watching a battle that had taken place 200 years earlier on the plains, in the plains of like North Dakota or South Dakota, somewhere like that. And I said to myself, how is that possible? Because we didn't have video cameras back then. We didn't have, I don't think even we had cameras yet. How is it possible? And my guide said, everything gets recorded. And I don't understand, even to this day, how is that possible? How is it possible that our lifetimes are recorded? But they are. And it has to be a God thing. Because even now, all these years later, I still can't understand or describe how that's possible. But all of us, when we have our life review, it's like watching yourself in a movie. You actually watch everything you went through. And I thought when I get back to the other side, when my lifetime is finished, there are so many things that I want to learn about, that I want to study. And something that I've been interested in my entire life has been D-Day in World War II in 1944, when the Allies invaded Normandy to bring the war to the Germans in World War II in France. And that's something that when I get back to the other side, I want to go into one of those rooms and I want to watch what happened because I'm so interested in that. And I love history, and I think a lot of us do too. But anything you want to learn about, you can go to these libraries on the other side and you can study them and you can learn about those events in history. So that was something that I just loved about that is you can learn about history with so many different ways on the other side. You can so many ways to learn. So that was the library. The next place he took me to was a castle, and it was a huge castle just like you would see in Europe or in France, Germany, France, England, all of them have these castles. And where he took me to on the other side was a place that if you wanted to learn about a particular era of Earth's history that you didn't have a lifetime in, like medieval Europe, for example, you could go to this place on the other side and you could see what they lived in. You could see what the castles looked like. So my guide told me to walk in. We walked in, and the first thing I noticed was that there was this red carpeting all along the inside, all inside this castle. And when you walked in, you felt like you were royalty. And on both sides of this wall of the castle were life size paintings. And they were paintings of people that had lived in these castles during that time on Earth. So that and they were life size, and you could see what the people looked like. So if you wanted to learn about King George or Queen Anne, you could go to this place on the other side. You could see what they lived in, and you could see what they looked like. And as far as you could see were these paintings, life-size paintings of what people looked like back then, and also what they were wearing, what their clothes were. Well, in front of each one of these paintings, all the way down this corridor, were these podiums, and on the podium was a book. And what this book was, it was about that person's life because they lived a public life. So if you wanted to learn about King George, you could go to the castle, you could look at his picture, and you could read about him in this book. And it was absolutely extraordinary to me because I love to learn new things. I think a lot of us do. Well, right about then I looked over to my right, and there was this stairwell. You know how a lot of castles had those round stairwells you had to walk up and down to get to the next floor? Well, there was a woman that was walking down this stairwell, and her hair was just about the length of yours. It was kind of blondish red hair, and she walked up to me, And I think this was the first time that anybody really acknowledged me except for my guide. And she walked up to me and she said, "Is there anything I can help you find?" And Tia, I said the stupidest thing I could have ever imagined. You know what I said to her? I said, "No thanks, I'm just looking." I could have, I just kicked myself because I could have asked her anything. Like, who are you? Where am I? I thought I was supposed to be having surgery. What is happening here? And my guide explained to me that what she likes to do on the other side is she is kind of like what we would call a professor or a scholar about medieval Europe. So if you wanted to learn about something about medieval Europe, you could go ask her. You could ask her anything about that part of Earth's history. And it was such an extraordinary thing to know that there are so many different ways to learn on the other side. So that was what she liked to do. She was a medieval kind of a professor. And the the next part of my NDE is how it ended. And my guide took me to a field. It was a meadow, and it was the most beautiful meadow I had ever seen. It had rolling green hills and flowers and grass. And I remember it was just a perfect day. The sun was out, it wasn't too hot, no wind, absolutely still. And then my guide disappeared. Alan left. The next thing I know, there was a man in front of me, and I could see him. He was wearing a white robe, a gown, and he had a golden sash around his waist, and he had gold colored sandals that laced up his calves. And I immediately knew that this was the being that we call Jesus, the person that lived a lifetime in the first century AD in Jerusalem, what we call Jesus. He was standing right in front of me. And when I went to look at him, I couldn't see his face because there was so much energy and so much light that was coming from him. It looked like shards of lightning were coming out of his face. So I couldn't see what he looked like. But he spoke to me and he said, "You must tell them there is no death." In the very second he said that, I woke back up in the operating room and everyone was looking down at me. And that was how my NDE ended. So they took me through this whole experience of showing me parts of the other side, what we do on the other side, what our lives are like. And then I was given some information at the end about what I'm supposed to do with the information because it wasn't meant for me. They didn't give me that information for me to hold it inside. It was, and I know that because of the way he told me. He didn't say, "You know what, John, when you have time, when it's convenient, would you share some of this experience with other people?" He didn't say it like that. He said, "You must tell them there is no death." So ever since then, I've just been trying to share my story and give people hope because that's what it did for me.
Your experience, it brings tears to my eyes because it is the most important message I think that we could possibly ever hear, especially right now where we're going through so much on our planet. To know that there's no death because there's so much anxiety and depression on our planet right now.
Did you know that I was just reading something the other day that said that in terms of the planet's history, there's never been such a high population of depression and anxiety in our history. So you're absolutely right.
Do you think there's a reason for these messages? I know there's more and more near death experiences coming out with these beautiful messages that we never die. Is that because of our state of mind?
Yeah, I think a lot of people when they come here, they they don't know what happens when we die. And it's the number one fear that all of us have is what happens? What if nothing happens after death? And I like to tell people that is the many years that I've been sharing my story, I can't, even to this day, get close enough to explain what it was really like, what it's like to be on the other side and to feel God. Because on the other side, when you're there, you feel God. You can feel how much he loves and cherishes every single one of us. And when you're here on earth, we don't have that same feeling. And it's almost like when you're on earth, you're in a battle and you're in a foxhole without a radio. You feel cut off. And there's this feeling that people get. I know I've had almost my entire life. It's kind of in the stomach, the solar plexus area, this feeling that there's more. There's more that I can remember. And I think a lot of people have this despair, being afraid of death. And I think where these messages are coming through to let people know that you got to wake up. You got to realize that this is not all there is. And life isn't about making money or having possessions and things and status, and none of that stuff matters because nobody asks you that when you finish your lifetime. Nobody cares if you were a millionaire or not. They care about, did you help other people while you were here? Did you make a difference? And there's something that one of my favorite quotes is from the Dalai Lama. And he said something that I just love. He said, our prime purpose in this life is to help others. And if you can't help them, at least don't hurt them. And I think that's one of the main reasons why we're here. We come in to learn, and we also come to help other people, to try to make people's lives easier, because it is a very hard world to live on.
Would you say it's one of the hardest? Did you get
Oh
any?
yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yep, absolutely. Because there are so many who don't want to come here because it is so hard. They go elsewhere. That's why it was such a big deal when I saw that man have the reunion. It was such a huge accomplishment to know that when you just show up here, you've already won the battle. Just to be here, you've already accomplished something huge. And that's what people don't remember.
So if you're here and you're struggling, just know you are a hero.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And people need to remember that there are so many people rooting for you that they don't even know.
I love that when we get to the other side, how you described all of our loved ones, everyone that we ever knew, everyone surrounding us, cheering us and clapping for us, and so happy that we're back and that we did an amazing job.
Yes, exactly. Exactly. And I think that's part of my message, to let people know that they are doing an amazing job. Even if they think they aren't, if they think their whole life has been a failure, it hasn't. They have done more than so many who don't even want to come here. They haven't even attempted it because they don't want to go through it. So everything we go through, it becomes this kind of like a badge of courage that when you get back to the other side, everything that you learned becomes part of you for eternity. And that's what we take with us. We don't take with us any possessions or money or things. None of that stuff goes with us. All that goes with us is what we learned.
You talked a lot about some of the historical figures from Earth and some of the events that happened on Earth. Can we also learn about the other planets and the other
Absolutely.
figures
Yep.
on those planets?
Absolutely. What I don't know is one thing people have asked me, and I have no idea because my guide never mentioned it. I don't know if every planet has its own other side. I don't know. The place where he took me, where Alan took me, was what we would call heaven. And I just don't know if it's there's only one or if there are multiple. But wherever I was, I can tell you that I cannot wait to get back. I I just cannot wait to have that feeling again. So I went through a really horrific depression after I came back because I didn't know how was I supposed to live the rest of my life knowing what that feeling is like, to be on the other side again, to be back home. Is it something that I think we all at the DNA level, I think all of us just missed that feeling. And I didn't know how to integrate my experience with living here on earth. So it took me a couple of months to really grasp, okay, this is what Jesus said. This is what I'm supposed to do, and I'm going to live the rest of my life trying to share my story and to anybody who will listen.
And thank you so much for doing that because, like, I said my husband passed. Stories like yours are what helped me to start healing. So you are
Oh,
doing so much good for so many people. And the details of the other side for you. Do you feel like you brought back any gifts with you to share with the world?
The only thing that I brought back was my memory, because people have asked me that, because you hear about a lot of NDE people when they come back and they have like they can hear the other side, or they can talk to their spirit guide, or they can talk to loved ones. I didn't get anything like that. The only thing I got was the ability to remember it in such acute detail. 'Cause I remember everything, every single thing that I saw, and I think that had to be a gift from God so that I could share it.
You say the only thing, but that is a huge gift because
Yeah,
the details that you bring back and the story, just the entire thing is so comforting and beautiful to know that we're never going to die, that we're going to be reunited with our loved ones. The,
absolutely.
there's nothing better. What else do you need to know?
Exactly. Exactly. Gives everybody hope, gives people hope again.
Yeah. And if my viewers wanted to reach out to you, is
Oh
there
yeah, they can absolutely reach out to me. Probably the best way is to email me. I'm on Facebook under John J. Davis, or they can email me directly at johnjdavis65 at icloud.com. So John J. Davis 65 at icloud.com. And I write back to everybody.
awesome? Thank you. If you had one message, I know there's so many messages built into your experience,
Yeah.
so many different things, but if you had one message that you'd hope the viewers to take away from your experience, what would it be?
I would say in the darkest moments of your life, there are reasons for it. And don't ever give up, because everybody is going to face those Mount Everest moments. And if you knew how much support you really have, you would be absolutely amazed, because there's a reason why we go through everything. And when you get to the other end of some difficult time, you realize what that experience has taught you, and it's made you more and has allowed you to help other people. So never give up. Remember that there are so many people rooting for you. People just don't have any idea. So never give up. Keep fighting. And when you finish the end of your life, when it comes to your last day, it's going to be the most wonderful day when you finish your lifetime and you go back to the other side. And everybody is there. Everyone you think you lost, everybody is there. And it's going to feel like you just left, and you just have to wait. Do your best, fight through life. It's never going to be easy. All of us have our tough trials, but it's worth it when you get to the end. So
That is
never give up.
that's so inspiring. Thank you. Thank you, John, for being my guest. This has been really beautiful experience for me. I appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me on. I so enjoyed being your guest, and I hope your listeners get hope from my story. That's my goal.
Thank you for being here. I just want to tell you how much I appreciate you being here and supporting my channel. If you haven't already subscribed, please consider subscribing if you enjoy near death experiences and other spiritually transformative stories. It helps the algorithm know that this information is useful and push it out to more people. And that's the goal, to get as many people to know that we are eternal spiritual beings and that we never die. Our bodies might die, but our essence will never die. And I want people to live with less fear. Let's all spread the word. Like, comment, subscribe, share, hit that little notification bell so you get all the notifications when my videos post. Thank you for all of your support. I'm sending love to you.